House lawmakers have started plenary debates on the bill that will create the Maharlika Investment Fund.
Though more lawmakers now support the fund's creation, given its amendments, some still believe the country is not ready for such a measure. Marian Enriquez with the big story.
The period of sponsorship and debate of the bill creating the Maharlika Investment Fund has begun at the House plenary. Committee on Banks and Financial Intermediaries Chairman Erwin Tieng stood as the sponsor.
As the Philippines secures its place not only as the rising star of Asia, but as a real economic leader in the Asia-Pacific, the creation of the MIF becomes imperative.
The MIF bill has undergone a series of amendments amid public criticism. Penal provisions that prescribe jail time and fines for violators of MIF guidelines have also been added. Other major changes include the removal of pension funds as sources to be replaced by the central bank dividends. Instead of the president, the finance chief will sit as chairman of the MIF board. House Senior Deputy Minority Leader Paul Daza, who earlier opposed the MIF, now supports the bill.
Umiral po ang demokrasya. Ito pong latest version is a much better version, and I would like to manifest that I intend to vote yes.
Despite the amendments, some lawmakers expressed doubts that the country is ready for the investment fund. These include Camarines Sur 3rd District Representative Gabriel Bordado.
Napapanahon nga ba? I don't believe so. I agree with the concerns raised by numerous top economists and academicians on the uncertainty of the Maharlika Investment Fund.
Gabriela Partiles Representative Arlene Brosas, meanwhile, questioned the basis for the estimated 7 to 8.5% yield of Land Bank and DBP should Maharlika be passed into law.
Hindi ba, Mr. Speaker, unscientific na gamitin yung other countries as benchmark, no? Dahil magdedepend yung ROI or return of investment sa portfolio or size of investments. Hindi ba overly optimistic itong 7 to 8% natin?
Tomorrow will be the House of Representatives' last session before it goes on break starting December 17.
Here to share his thoughts on the amendments made on the Maharlika Investment Fund bill, we have with us House Senior Deputy Minority Leader and Northern Samar 1st District Representative Paul Daza. Good evening and welcome to the big story, Congressman Daza.
Robbie, Gretchen, good evening. Thank you for having me.
Mr. Daza, just last week we had conversations with you. You were very much against this. You very much shared the concerns of people, both on the fiscal side as well as on the governance side. Are you now telling the public that there's nothing to worry about?
Well, yes. In fairness to the sponsors, there were many, many amendments made to the bill. In fact, from the original version, which I oppose strongly, and in fact, before the media covered the Maharlika bill, I was already speaking out in the committee. We're now on the 4th version, and as you said in your report, the president is no longer the chairman. We added the board of directors. We added 2 independent directors to 4. The original version, they had to be appointed by the president. They're not appointed by the president anymore. The national budget, GSIS, SSS, are now not sources of funding. From 250 billion, the real evidence for everyone is from the original target of 250 billion, I estimate it'll be now about 100 to 110 billion, so less than half of the original target. And there are many other provisions that were added, and I'm satisfied. I think my role as a minority member of the House is to be constructive. And in fairness to the sponsors, to the Speaker, and to the other colleagues, they listen to the public. As you reported, tinanggal po yung pinakamalaki, SSS, GSIS.
Okay, yesterday we were speaking with retired Associate Justice Antonio Carpio regarding this. He says no problems with the legal side to it. But now the question is the bill sound enough? And without the funds from GSIS and SSS, he says we might have to borrow to fund the Maharlika Investment Fund. And apart from that, timing is also an issue. Are we ready for such a bill, for such a investment fund?
We could, now is as good time as any, Gretchen. This has been debated in the House, in the public, and in fact, the senators have joined into the debate. Now, I am confident, if you look at all the provisions now in the bill, there are enough safeguards. In fact, I think because of all the oversight and the criminal provision for mismanagement, I think at the end of the day, what will happen is when they hire professionals to run the fund, because of all the oversight, the audit, in fact, there's a transparency website that's required. And there's a provision that you can go to jail, basically, if you mismanage it. At the end of the day, I think this fund will be so conservative, to be honest with you. I have background in investments. If, let's say, I was recruited to be part of that, the management, I'd be so scared to make a mistake. So I think at the end of the day, the bill has enough safeguards. It's now a much lower amount. And anyways, the land bank and DBP funds coming in are already investable funds. They're already investing it anyway, so they're just pulling it together, get some economies of scale, and I think that's fine. I'm comfortable with the bill. There are many other provisions that I can give you one by one that was included as improvements on the original version.
Congressman Daza, this is something I kept repeating. Economist Calixto Chiquiamco had said very early on that, the fiscal and the governance issues aside, he said that this country will be ready for this when we have rule of law in this country. He didn't say it, but I think a lot of people are looking at formally. You have penalties there, you have people getting investigated, maybe some people will go to prison. You would think that we have enough laws that would scare people away from plunder, but you have colleagues in Congress that have been found guilty of plunder. You could punish those people. You can talk about penalties, but one thing that people ask is, all our past cases of corruption, we haven't recovered the money. There are people guilty of plunder. We have not recovered that. There are people that have been found guilty of stealing. You can talk about penalty, but at the end of the day, we do a very bad job of recovering losses and certainly even recovering stolen money. What assurance do we have that if something happens with this fund, that we can actually recover money?
And I agree with you. I agree with everything you said. We have problems with the rule of law, and that's why I was so outspoken against the bill when it was originally filed. Now, we won't fix the rule of law issues with this legislation. The question is, are we ready? Now, if you look at the amendments, we now have 4 independent directors who will not be appointed by the president from the private sector. We will have a transparency website. We will have a joint oversight committee by the House and Senate, a board of advisors. I think there's enough safeguards, and the criminal provision I mentioned to you, I think there's enough in there where the public, both Senate and House, and the COA, in fact, there's internal, external audits. Like what I said, this will be a good test case for us because I can't imagine there will how somebody would be able to get away with a hidden agenda on this fund if you look at all the details. Now, having said that, we have rule of law issues. Everything you said is correct. And that really why I was so happy that the majority. I'm one of the few members in the minority. You have to remember, if the majority wanted to pass this bill, they could have done it. They could have done it very easily. What happened? They listened to members like me. I'm just one of a few speaking out, and they carried these amendments. So they could have railroaded it. They could have approved it without any amendments, but they listened to me, to the public, to people like you, and there were improvements on the bill. And intellectually, I can support the bill, despite all the other issues in our country.
Mr. Daza, I wanted to ask why you would separate the question of rule of law on the concern about whether or not we are ready. But never mind that, we don't have a lot of time. I just want to ask this other thing. Congress did listen, the majority did listen to the concerns as far as amendments are concerned. But there were a lot of people in the public whose bottom line was not to amend, but just to really hold off on this, or at least have a real discussion on the fundamental question of whether or not we're even supposed to be doing this. Our question, sir, is given our concerns, and you're acknowledging still concerns about rule of law, one question people have now is, what's the rush? Why not have a conversation and further debates about this? What exactly is the rush, Congressman, to pass this before Christmas?
Robbie, let me go back on the rule of law. If we made rule of law an issue and a concern every legislation, we would never pass a bill. You have to remember, we just passed a 5.2 trillion budget for 2023. If we use the argument of rule of law, then we would never pass our national budget every year, right? So that shouldn't stifle us in doing good legislation. Second, on the timing, that was exactly my point. And because I'm only one out of 315, there was no way I could derail it because I knew with the numbers of the majority, it will pass. So the role I took was to be constructive, to make it into a better bill, rather than passing a bill that's substandard. So I think there are enough amendments in there for me personally to be able to support it. Anyways, it's going to pass because majority rules, and the majority will pass this, whether it's this week or when we go back in January, it's going to pass the House.
All right, thank you so much for your thoughts on the Maharlika Investment Fund and Northern Samar Representative Paul Daza. We will continue this discussion on the MIF with former Senator Franklin Drilon later on in the program.